Have you ever watched someone destroy the person they claimed to love, night after night, behind closed doors, while the whole world applauded them at dinner parties? Have you ever wondered what happens when a man who has never been told no finally meets the one consequence he cannot charm his way out of? Have you ever seen a woman so broken she couldn't remember who she was before him, and then watched her find out? This is that story. Lydia Carmichael was 26 years old when she married Brennan Cole, and she was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. Not because she was loud or showy, but because there was something steady about her, warm. She taught third grade at Riverside Elementary in Columbus, Ohio, and her students' parents requested her class specifically because she had a way of making children feel like their words mattered. She laughed easily. She called her mother every Sunday. She kept a small herb garden on her apartment balcony and took it seriously. She met Brennan at a friend's birthday dinner. He was charming in the way that men who've practiced being charming always are. Attentive, funny, a little self-deprecating, asking follow-up questions when most men had already moved on to talking about themselves. He remembered that she mentioned her sister lived in Portland. He texted her the next day with a recommendation for a bookstore she'd said she'd been meaning to visit. He showed up. At first, that was all it was. He showed up. Brennan Cole was a senior financial advisor at a wealth management firm downtown. He wore good suits and drove a clean car and knew which restaurants had good wine lists. He was 34, had his own place, and seemed, by every visible measure, like a man who had his life together. Lydia's friends liked him. Her mother liked him. Her sister Candace, who was a social worker and had seen enough to be skeptical of everything, liked him too, at least in the beginning. They got engaged after 14 months. Lydia said yes on a Tuesday evening in her own kitchen, which she would later think was the first sign she should have read more carefully. He hadn't taken her anywhere special, hadn't done anything elaborate. He'd simply slid the ring across the counter while she was washing dishes and said, "I think we should just do this." At the time, she found it romantic, unperformative, real. They married the following spring. The change didn't happen overnight. That's the part no one tells you, and the part that makes it so hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. There's no single moment you can point to and say, "That's when everything turned." It's slower than that. It's 100 small moments, each one easy to explain away, each one leaving just enough doubt that you convince yourself you misread it. It started with small corrections. The way she loaded the dishwasher, the way she greeted his colleagues at work events. "You talk too much about yourself, Lydia, these are my clients." The way she spent a Saturday afternoon. He didn't yell at first, he didn't need to. He had a voice that went very quiet and very flat when he was displeased, and somehow that was worse than yelling. It made her feel like she was always one wrong step from something she couldn't name. By their first anniversary, she had stopped calling Candace as often. She told herself she was just busy. She didn't tell herself, couldn't yet, that Brennan had said, more than once, that her sister had a negative energy, that Candace always left Lydia wound up, that maybe some space there would do her good. It didn't feel like control at the time. It felt like a husband noticing something she'd missed. She stopped wearing a particular blue dress he said, made her look like she was trying too hard. She stopped ordering wine at dinner without checking with him first. She rearranged her classroom pictures when he said the photos of her students she'd put in their living room were a little much. Every small surrender felt like accommodation. Like being a good partner. Like being the kind of wife who listened. The first time he grabbed her arm, they were in the kitchen. She had forgotten to confirm a dinner reservation and the other couple had shown up to find no table waiting. Brennan drove home in silence, and when they got inside, she started to apologize, and he grabbed her wrist and squeezed until she stopped talking. He didn't hit her, he just held her there, looking at her, until she went very still. He let go. He went to bed. He never mentioned it. She stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes after, turning the cold faucet on and holding her wrist under the water, even though it didn't hurt that much. She was trying to figure out what had just happened. She was trying to find the part where it was her fault, because that was easier than the alternative. The violence, when it became undeniable, arrived slowly and then all at once. A shove in the hallway. A hand closed around the back of her neck during an argument that was really just her, trying to explain she hadn't meant to upset him. And then one Saturday morning, after she had mentioned gently that she missed seeing her friends, he hit her across the face hard enough that her ear rang for 2 days. He cried afterward. He always cried afterward. He said he didn't know what came over him. He said she had to understand the pressure he was under at work, the weight he carried, the way she sometimes pushed buttons she didn't even realize she was pushing. He said he loved her more than anything. He said it would never happen again. It always happened again. She hid it the way women in that situation hide things. Foundation and sunglasses, long sleeves in July, strategic seating at school events so no one got a close look. She told herself she was protecting him. She told herself that if she could just get better at anticipating his moods, at not making him feel like she was undermining him, at being what he needed, it would stop. She made herself smaller and smaller, and the smaller she got, the angrier he became, and she could not understand why. Candace noticed. Of course Candace noticed. It took 3 years for Lydia to tell her. 3 years, a fractured wrist she said happened when she slipped on ice, and a moment at a coffee shop when Candace put her hand over Lydia's and didn't say anything. Just looked at her and waited. And something in Lydia finally cracked open. She told her sister maybe a third of it. Even then she minimized. She said it wasn't that bad. She said he was under a lot of stress. She said she was partly to blame. Candace sat across from her and didn't argue with any of it. She was a social worker. She knew better than to argue. She said, "Okay, I hear you. Can I ask you something?" And Lydia nodded, and Candace said, "Are you safe right now today?" And Lydia opened her mouth to say yes, and instead she started to cry. That was the beginning of the way out, even if it didn't look like one yet. Candace had connections. A domestic violence advocate named Renee who worked with a legal aid organization, a counselor who specialized in trauma and abuse, and a patient, methodical understanding of how these situations worked legally. She didn't push Lydia to leave. She knew that pushing women to leave before they were ready was how women ended up in more danger. Instead she said, "Whenever you're ready to start building a record, we'll start building a record." It took 8 more months before Lydia was ready. What made her ready was the night Brennan threw her against the wall in their bedroom and her head hit the door frame, and she had to sit down on the floor because she couldn't see straight. She sat there on the floor and he stood over her saying she should calm down. She was being dramatic. It was barely anything. And something went cold and clear in her chest. Not rage, exactly. Something quieter than that. A decision. She called Candace the next morning from her classroom during her prep period with the door closed. Over the following months, Lydia documented everything. She kept a private journal on an encrypted notes app Renee had shown her how to use. Dates, times, descriptions, photos of bruises taken in the bathroom at school where he couldn't see them. Renee told her to document every incident with as much detail as possible. What triggered it, what he said, what he did, the physical evidence. Lydia was methodical about it. Organized. Her students would have recognized the same focused attention she gave to lesson plans. She opened a separate bank account at a credit union across town, putting in small amounts from her teaching salary that Brennan didn't track closely enough to notice. She made a copy of every important document she could access. Her social security card, her passport, their marriage certificate, insurance paperwork. She kept everything in a lockbox at Candace's apartment. She stopped going to couples therapy. Brennan had insisted on couples therapy 6 months into the marriage, which Lydia had initially found hopeful, and later understood was a way for him to perform a version of himself for a professional audience, and to reframe her responses to his behavior as the actual problem. The therapist wasn't bad, she just didn't have the full picture. Lydia started seeing Renee's counselor instead, alone, and that was different. She was not building evidence for the sake of it. She was building a case because Candace, who had grown quieter and more careful the deeper she understood the situation, had been direct with her. "If you leave without documentation, he can make this very hard for you. He has money. He has connections. You need more than your word against his." Lydia knew she was right. She had seen the way Brennan operated at work functions, the way he made people feel seen and important, the way he built goodwill like a currency he could spend when he needed to. She had watched him charm a police officer out of a speeding ticket by talking about his father's service record. She understood what she was up against. During this time, she also discovered something she hadn't known. She had been suspicious for months. A pattern of late evenings, a work contact named Shelby who texted at odd hours, a shift in his behavior that felt less like stress and more like distraction. She didn't go looking for confirmation with any real hope that she was wrong. She went looking because information was now something she collected. She found the messages on an old tablet he kept in his home office, logged into an account he thought she didn't know existed. Shelby was not a work contact. Shelby was a woman he had been seeing, on and off, for 2 years, and what disturbed Lydia more than the infidelity itself, she had grown numb to him in ways that surprised her, was the nature of the messages. He spoke about Lydia to Shelby with a contempt so casual it was clear it had become ordinary for him. He mocked her job, her family, the way she cried. He called her fragile. He said she needed him more than she understood. Lydia photographed every screen. she filed for divorce on a Thursday morning in October. 2 weeks after she had quietly moved the last of her important belongings to Candace's apartment, under the cover of a school professional development day, when she knew Brennan would be at work. She had arranged to stay with Candace temporarily, had confirmed coverage for her classroom, had spoken with Renee about a safety plan in case Brennan's reaction was dangerous. She did not tell him first. The first call he made to her after the papers were served was calm in that particular way of his, the flat, controlled calm that she had once mistaken for rationality. He said she was making a mistake. He said she needed to think about what she was doing. He said they could work this out. He said she was confused. The second call was less calm. By that evening, he had called her 11 times. He showed up at Candace's building and Candace stepped outside and told him, in the even professional voice of someone who had done this before, that Lydia was not available and that he needed to leave. He left, but not before he said, to Candace directly, that she had always been a problem, that she had never wanted Lydia to be happy, that this was her fault. Candace went inside and wrote down the exact time, his exact words, and the name of the neighbor who had witnessed the exchange. Brennan hired an attorney quickly, as expected. He was a man who moved fast when he felt he was losing something. What he did not know, or perhaps underestimated, was how much Lydia had prepared. When her attorney reviewed what she had documented over those months, the photos, the journal, the medical record from a clinic visit she'd made for her wrist using her school's insurance, the screenshots. He told her it was one of the more thorough records he had seen from a client in her situation. The deposition was the hardest part. Sitting across a table and recounting it, all of it, in the precise and clinical language of a legal proceeding, while Brennan sat beside his attorney, looking composed and faintly injured. That required something from her she hadn't known she had. She told the truth. Every detail. She looked at the wall above his attorney's head, and she did not flinch and she did not cry, not in that room. She cried in the car afterward, alone, for a long time. 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Brennan's attorney reached out about a settlement. His client, the attorney said, wished to avoid the emotional toll of a prolonged proceeding on both parties. Lydia's attorney read her the language and she recognized it immediately. Her husband wanted to avoid the emotional toll of having those photographs and that journal introduced as evidence in a courtroom. He wanted to avoid Candace's testimony, and Renee's documentation, and the neighbor from outside the building, and the clinic record. Lydia and her attorney discussed it. She asked one question: would a settlement prevent the criminal case? Her attorney said no. The criminal case, assault charges Renee had helped her file separately, would proceed regardless of the civil divorce. She agreed to the settlement on the financial terms her attorney recommended, and she let the criminal case continue. Brennan Cole was convicted on 2 counts of domestic assault, 18 months after Lydia filed for divorce. The sentence was 3 years, with the possibility of early release contingent on completing a mandatory intervention program. His firm placed him on administrative leave the week the conviction came down, and he resigned 2 weeks after that. The professional reputation he had maintained so carefully, the charm he had deployed so strategically, did not survive the specifics of what the court record contained. Lydia was teaching a math lesson on the morning the verdict came through. Candace texted her a single word. Lydia excused herself to the hallway and stood outside her classroom door with her back against the wall for a moment. Listening to the sound of her students working inside, pencils moving, one of them quietly counting aloud. She went back in. She finished the lesson. That evening, she and Candace sat on the floor of Lydia's new apartment. She had her own place now, small and imperfect and entirely hers, and ate takeout straight from the containers. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much that needed saying. Candace had brought a bottle of sparkling water, because Lydia didn't drink anymore. A choice she'd made somewhere in the middle of all of it. One of many small decisions that had quietly added up to becoming herself again. Renee's organization had asked Lydia, a few months prior, if she would be willing to share her story with a small group of women currently navigating similar situations. Not the legal details, just her experience, what she had done, how she had found her way through. Lydia had said she needed to think about it. She had thought about it for a long time. She said yes. She showed up at the community center on a rainy Wednesday evening and sat across from 7 women she'd never met, and she told them the truth. Not the clean, resolved version, the messy one. The part where she'd defended him in her own head for years. The part where she'd believed, genuinely believed, that she was the problem. The part where she'd sat on a kitchen floor with her wrist throbbing and tried to find a version of reality where it was still her fault, because her fault was something she could fix. She told them about the encrypted notes app. She told them about the credit union across town. She told them about Candace, who had not pushed, who had simply waited and been present until Lydia found her own way to ready. One of the women asked her, "Did you ever think you wouldn't get out?" Lydia looked at her hands. She thought about the blue dress she'd stopped wearing, the herb garden she'd let die, the Sunday calls to her mother she'd quietly reduced because Brennan said she was too dependent on her family. "Yes," she said, "for a long time I thought this was just what my life was." She paused. "I was wrong about that." The room was quiet. Outside the rain had picked up, drumming steadily against the windows. Lydia's herb garden is growing on her balcony again. Basil and rosemary and a stubborn little thyme plant that keeps coming back no matter what. She calls her mother on Sundays. She has coffee with Candace on Saturday mornings and they talk about nothing important and everything that matters. She still teaches 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary, and her students' parents still request her class specifically. She is 31 years old. She has her whole life ahead of her. And Brennan Cole, who believed he had built something untouchable, is learning what it means to live with what he did. In a way he cannot charm his way out of, cannot negotiate away, cannot blame on someone else's mood or a misunderstanding or the particular pressure of a Tuesday. Some truths, once they are in the light, stay there.